Hello everyone, and welcome back to Talking to the Void. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, and today we're going to discuss why I think the MCU is screwed. Consider this your spoiler warning for potentially every MCU entry up until this point. Ironically, the first video I ever made on this channel was a long-winded 2-hour discussion of the entire MCU up to that point, and I discussed a lot of reasons why I loved Marvel. Unfortunately, I've fallen out of love with the MCU due to several choices that they've made along the way, and to be honest, I should have seen the writing on the wall when they killed Loki within the first few minutes of Infinity War. Today's episode is the first in a series, which I will be melodramatically calling The Death of the MCU. Throughout this series, I will be discussing how the MCU has failed its viewers along the way, how they could have avoided these issues, and why I think they've set themselves up for failure with the pending 2026 release of Avengers Doomsday. Without further ado, welcome to Part 1, The Warning Signs, Section 1, Avengers Age of Ultron. I think that there have been warning signs along the way in the MCU that should have clued us into its potential for failure long before things really got bad. For example, the introduction and then destruction of Quicksilver in Avengers Age of Ultron. Quicksilver's sole purpose in that movie was to get fridged in order to motivate Wanda, or the Scarlet Witch, to join the Avengers. And a quick side note, fridging a character, or a character getting fridged, means that a character was killed off for the sole purpose of motivating another character to do something. I hate when characters get fridged because it's simply a waste of a character. Quicksilver had the potential to be far more than just a minor antagonist trash-talking speedster, but that's what he was reduced to for the sake of motivating Wanda to join the Avengers. Now, there's another big reason why the introduction of both Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch in Age of Ultron was problematic. They both have deep ties to the X-Men. We already had the X-Men movies separate from the MCU, and the introduction of Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch ought to have signaled the entrance of the X-Men to the MCU scene. But that, as we know, is not what happened. The Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver that we knew in Age of Ultron were not only played by different actors from the X-Men versions of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, but they were given powers in a lab run by Hydra that was completely unaffiliated with the X-Men. I'm all for adding interesting twists on characters and their origins when it's appropriate, but by introducing Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in this way, the MCU unintentionally shot itself in the foot. By having them be divorced from the X-Men, you can't have the established X-Men from the other movies still exist in the same universe. Otherwise, you'd have 2 Scarlet Witches and 2 Quicksilvers, and things get muddy real fast. And if you don't have the established X-Men in this universe, that implies the existence of the multiverse, which they later made canon, of course, and that brings about a completely new and complicated set of problems, which I will get into in a future video. Now, you could argue, of course, that this was intentional. That is, it was intentional to make a version of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver that were not associated with the X-Men. And I understand that, they wanted the X-Men to be separate from the Avengers for story purposes, say. But, as the X-Men are also property of Marvel, and you have signaled to your audience that you now have 2 separate universes in which these hero teams exist, you've fractured your own image of a Marvel Cinematic Universe, because it's no longer one unified whole. It's the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse. And I will shout from the rooftops until the end of time that multiverses are frequently problematic garbage because very few people know how to handle them effectively. And I will be doing that in a future video, so stay tuned for that. By the way, I am aware of the fact that the X-Men movies were produced by Fox, aka 20th Century Studios, and therefore the X-Men movies, were not owned by Marvel Studios, who created the Avengers, etc. And that created a licensing issue with the characters of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, which is part of why they had their own origins in the MCU and were played by different actors. However, all of this mess could have been avoided if A, Marvel Studios bought the rights to the X-Men films from Fox for the sake of integrating the characters into the MCU, or B, Marvel Studios didn't put their own versions of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver into the MCU. So, were licensing rights issues involved in the choice to create different versions of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver? Probably yes. But did Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver have to be involved in Age of Ultron? No. So to summarize that long-winded rant, the first warning sign that the MCU was headed down a dangerous path was their introduction of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver divorced from the X-Men because they unintentionally created the Marvel Cinematic Multiverse by doing so, which opens up another big can of worms that I will delve into later, as I keep promising. Later as in a later video. Add on to that fact that they introduced Quicksilver only to fridge him within the same movie, and you've got the beginnings of a recipe for disaster. By the way, another quick side note on fridging, it's called that because of, I forget what the original comic was, but it was a comic in which somebody's girlfriend was killed and her body was stuffed in the fridge, and he found her there, and that's where the term fridging comes from. Anyway, that is all for this episode of my new series, The Death of the MCU. I hope you enjoyed this first episode. If you did, please like this video and consider subscribing to my channel so you don't miss my upcoming videos in this series, as it's going to be a long one. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Sending you all the love.